Good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. I am Dorm. This is Dorm Streams, and welcome to another Games of the Decade episode. Today, we're going to be looking at games 60 through 51. We're almost sort of halfway there. It's very exciting. These games are just outside the top 50 for me, but that does not mean that they are any lower quality than anything we've seen yet. Of course, these are the best games so far if you've been watching this video series chronologically. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Number 60, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, aka PUBG. All right, so let's start with kind of a baffling one for me to place. PUBG is a battle royale. I'm sure most of you are at least somewhat aware of it. Similar to Fortnite that was earlier on this list for me just because I did not play a lot of it. This game was the game maybe when I was making this list that kind of ascended and descended more than any other game. When I was first kind of blocking things out, it was in the top 30 or so. And then my selection process, which I explained in the first video, but I'll just briefly explain again, was basically comparing games and saying, is it better than this game? Is it better than this game? And then that's kind of how it fell. So I did that for 120 or so games. And PUBG ended up falling at the 60 spot. And I think that's about appropriate. Here's why. It's sort of a zeitgeist, right? It's sort of, if you were in the moment, it's one of the greatest multiplayer experiences I've ever experienced. I was playing with my buddy Team Liddy, twitch.tv/Team Liddy, and we were playing with some of our other friends, Dova, Zero, some of the people who are foundations of my stream community were around during the PUBG days. And that game to me is so important. From that aspect of it, I found some of my first Twitch friends through PUBG. I guess I should explain what the game is. If you don't know what a battle royale is, it's basically a massive multiplayer game. So there are around 100 people or so per map, and you're all on a map. And basically the idea is to be it's the last person standing. It's King of the Hill. It's those kind of game modes. And you get one life. You can either be by yourself and it could be 100 solo people. You can be with a partner and it'd be called duos. You can be with 4 people and it'd be called squads, etc. Those game modes were so addictive because I once had PUBG explained to me by Wes Keltner, who is the head mustache at Gun Media, I would say, as sort of a miniature RPG. It's like every round is its own RPG. And I thought that was a fascinating way to describe it. So shout out to Wes, because it really is. That's a great way to describe what the game is. You land on the map. You then start building your loadout. The goal is to get more and more good gear. So you're almost leveling up your gear in that way. And the more people you kill, the better gear you're likely to get, because then you can loot their gear. And there's the sort of compounding thing in the round is this circle that is getting smaller and smaller, basically pushing all the competitors closer to each other. So that kind of solves the thing of if someone wants to just stay in camp, if someone wants to just hide out, well, they have to be within the circle or they're going to die. So it's a really interesting strategy game. It's one of those games that is played at a very high level. And even going back to it recently just to see what's up, it's definitely out of my depth now. There was a time where I was decent at it. I wasn't great at PUBG. I never was, but I was serviceable, I would say. And that time is long past. But the memories I have, it's, I think, my most played Steam game at around 600 hours. I have to include PUBG at some point on this list. I feel like this was the right time, because it is one of my most played games of the decade without a doubt, and also one of the best pockets of time for me. I look back to that time so fondly, and PUBG is a big reason why. I feel like I've left some stuff hanging there. The game is great. I really do think the game is pretty fantastic. It's more realistic than Fortnite if you've played Fortnite. It's definitely got more of a realism vibe, a little bit slower, a lot less arcadey, no building. And I think the straightforwardness of it is what made me like it more. This was pre-Apex, which I think is it's not on this list, but is arguably a more fun version of PUBG. PUBG is more serious now. Apex is more arcadey, if that makes sense. I do think the game is great, but as you can tell, the game is very personal to me, and so that's why it landed on this spot in the list, as opposed to around where Fortnite did, a game I didn't really connect with. So I just wanted to explain a little bit of why this Battle Royale is higher for me than Fortnite, the arguably more successful Battle Royale. Number 59, Saints Row the Third. I immediately have a smile on my face thinking about Saints Row 3. It's maybe the silliest game that I've played by a AAA publisher. It is so silly. If you don't know about Saints Row, and this was my first Saints Row, to be completely honest, I know a lot of people adore Saints Row 2. That game I had never played. I'd never played a Saints Row leading up to this. Saints Row kind of had this reputation, at least to me, someone who had never played it, as sort of a GTA-like. I think it drew a lot of comparisons to GTA just because of the nature of it. It's open world. There's a lot of shooting. It's crime based. It's very similar in gameplay style to GTA. Saints Row 3 for me sort of made enough of its own lane for me to consider it a really great game. It's ridiculously silly and arcadey. I think the first mission of Saints Row 3, you fall out of a plane and then shoot boxes in order to be able to land. It's insane. I've played it years ago, but it's just the most insane game. There are a bunch of what I think are really interesting sort of side missions. One of them is, I'm going to forget the name, but it's something like Professor Ginky's Super Fun Time Now or something, which is in this world a game show based around killing people. And so you can go be on the game show and get a high score. And that's one of the challenges. It's bizarre, but in the best way. As you can tell with some of the games on this list, Octodad, some of the other games that will be included later, I love a good, just silly, fun game. And to me, that's what Saints Row is. I also think the multiplayer was kind of underrated. I played it with a few friends. And just driving around that city, this was sort of, I just think the multiplayer fit in with this really arcadey world very brilliantly. There's a lot of really stupid weapons you can get and dumb like combos. There's basically every time you do melee fights with someone, you can like kick them in the balls or like spine buster them or pile drive them, like a lot of wrestling moves in the combat, which of course I appreciated. And then there's also just this entire arcadey story with the most ridiculous stuff. There's a gun that can send people to a different dimension, and that's how you kill them. You basically just teleport them away and then they go away. The story basically sees you become a superhero. And before GTA 5 was doing sort of their expansion stuff for the online, where you could just get a DeLorean that can fly around the city or get these random vehicles that can be a helicopter and a plane, Saints Row was kind of doing that. And I think it deserves some credit for that. But I don't know if that influenced GTA 5's decision, but it definitely had that, oh, right, I can just kind of fly around the world now if I want to. Feel to it, and it felt great. The city was great. It was super colorful. I love all the silly stuff of this game, and I think a game that doesn't take itself too seriously is super valid for me, and this fits right into that pocket. Number 58, Detroit Become Human. This, for some reason, this section of the videos is maybe my hardest to place so far per game. Detroit was another game that I thought would be in my top 50, and the more I kept comparing stuff, it just slightly got edged out, landed here at 58. And I think that's a good spot for it. I had never played a Quantic Dream game before, the studio behind Detroit Become Human. I had heard of David Cage. I knew about that. I knew people loved Heavy Rain and weren't super high on Beyond Two Souls. Although I've heard that's kind of evened out now. I think people like it. I've seen people stream it. It seems to be more well received now than it used to be. If you don't know what a Quantic Dream game looks like, it's very narrative heavy, which, as you know, is something I enjoy. And your decisions, both in gameplay and in dialogue, affect the story. So there's a lot of branching paths. I remember the E3 demo where they first showed it off, or one of the first E3 demos, and they sort of showed a scene playing out. It was kind of a high stakes scene. You were playing as this cop named Connor, which you would go on to play as one of the main characters of the game. And this android, it's a futuristic game about sort of androids versus humans and how people are learning to live with each other, and androids maybe wanted to be seen as human. It's that's sort of the idea of the narrative. There's an android holding this little girl hostage, and you as Connor are basically trying to talk him off the ledge. Quite literally, he's on a ledge. All of your decisions leading up to it. Did you find this clue about who this android is? Did you find this clue about his motivation? Does that help your dialogue? Did you find this weapon so maybe you could pull a gun, or maybe you could show them that you're safe by throwing the gun and saying, look, I don't have any weapons. Like, there are a lot of things that influence this sort of final scene, and then they zoom out and show all of the branching path decisions. And even that's echoed in the game, not just in the marketing, because after every scene, you do see sort of this branching path family tree kind of thing, I guess, showing what each scene could have been, or at least what paths you didn't unlock. That wide scope is very impressive from a technical standpoint, and playing it, I just kept going like, oh, wow, so that could have led to this. Okay. And it's a game that I've always wanted to do a second playthrough of. I've never gotten around to it just because the backlog for games is insane right now, but it's a game that will always kind of be on the back of my brain as like something I want to go back and explore. The narrative I thought was really cool and a little cheesy in some spots, but I think that's okay. There are basically three main protagonists, Kara, Connor, and Marcus. And I would say Kara's story is the best of the three. I think Connor's story is maybe the most interesting way they use the narrative system, because you are a cop, and sort of seeing how that relates to being a detective is very interesting. Marcus's story is kind of where I have a little bit of the issues, because his is very political. Not that I have issues with games being political. I don't want that to sound like that's the case. I love game makers. Make the game you want to make it as political as you want. I think it's great. Art's art. I just think that it's a little ham-fisted in its approach of politics and sort of this idea of what makes someone human. I think that's a really interesting concept, but I think the game also, and this has been a critique of a lot of David Cage games from what I've heard, the game also kind of shoves it down your throat what they think is the right message here. The performances are great. I love the performances of all the main characters. I just think that storyline in particular is a little like, I'm going to use the word masturbatory, because you can tell that they love how much they've crafted the story, and that's great. But it almost feels like, look at how smart we're being by showing that this narrative can happen, and look at how smart our protagonist is. I don't know. It just feels a little out of place, and a little too, again, I like the message. I like the ideas behind the message. I just think the approach was a little heavy-handed, if you will. But overall, the gameplay is great. It's a super easy stream game. As you all know, I love narrative games, and I think it definitely deserves applauding, if not just for its technical prowess and the fact that this game exists. This kind of game is a rare treat no matter what decade it's in, and I adore it for that. So yeah, that's why it's this high on the list. Number 57, Into the Breach. So we've talked about Faster Than Light, FTL, by Subset Games earlier on this list, and all of the aspects I love, all the replayability, how it makes you crave just one more game, but even for me, I was surprised that I like the gameplay. Imagine if the same developer made a game with gameplay I find more enjoyable, but with all of the hallmarks of a different game that's on the Games of the Decade list, all the positive aspects of it. That gives you Into the Breach, which I've described in the past as sci-fi video game chess. It is one of the most addictive puzzle games I've ever played. I don't even know if you could describe it as a puzzle, but that's what I'm going to describe it as. It is top-down mech-based combat, but it's turn-based, and each mech that you have has different abilities, and you can upgrade those abilities, but it's all one run. So you start out with your base 3 mechs, and you basically move map to map, region to region, completing these smaller maps, these basically what amount to puzzles. And each time they play a little bit differently. You're trying to protect different things, usually like cities or buildings. Every time an enemy attacks a building, you lose 1 point of this sort of marker. You lose enough of those points and the game is over. So every map feels important. You can't just say like, this is the first map, I kind of take it easy, whatever, if they hit one, because then you have to account for the one that they hit, and that doesn't recharge on a new map. That's sort of your health bar, if you will, for the different progressions in the map. Now, obviously, there are ways that you can regain those points. There are ways that you can defend against those points. Your whole idea is to sort of get your mech in the way, but you don't want to kill your mech because that loses some progress. You're playing defense and offense in one move, and that's kind of why it feels like chess, because you're always accounting for what they're going to do next, and you're trying to outplay them 3 moves ahead while also outplaying them in the move right now. It is, again, one of the most addictive puzzle games. I recently made the mistake, great decision, of buying it on Switch. And it is a game that if my Switch is anywhere near my bed, I might as well say goodbye to an hour of sleep. It's so good. Each run feels like the run. You feel like you're going to kill it. And then some catastrophe strikes and you're just like, oh, you're so drained by it. But the runs take quite a bit of time. Like runs can range anywhere from like, of course, 5-10 minutes if the first few maps get you, or like 40-50 minutes. So you've invested a good amount of time into each round. So losing the round feels like so defeating. But again, as with FTL, as with a lot of these other randomly generated games, sort of one run games that I've talked about in the past, this game has that just one more vibe. And then suddenly, like I said, you've lost hours of sleep because you just keep playing into the breach. The game's art style is very cool. The music's very cool, synthy kind of Blade Runner-y style stuff. But I can't sing the praises of Into the Breach enough. I think this game's fantastic. You should pick it up. Number 56, Destiny. Right. Destiny is one of those games that most people, I'm sure, are probably aware of, at least somewhat. It's made by Bungie, who made Halo 3, one of my favorite games of all time. Not on this list because that was from like 2006, but a developer I really love, Bungie, sort of went away from Microsoft, became their own studio, and released Destiny, which is probably the closest I've been to being super into an MMO. It both is and isn't an MMO. It's not your sort of classic World of Warcraft. You've got a hot bar. These are the buttons you press to attack. It is an active shooter. It's a first-person shooter, but pretty much with all the other elements of an MMO. And this was the game that finally peeled back the curtain for me on why people are addicted to MMOs. I spent a ridiculous amount of time in Destiny. I don't know how much because it was on PS4 and it's hard to track your hours there. But I spent so much time on Destiny with a bunch of buddies. We had a very dedicated fire team, which was a group of 3 people. And pretty much every night we were either doing something called Prison of Elders or all these other game modes, just getting more loot, getting better loot. It was just a very special time in my life as a gamer, I think. And it was during college, and there were a lot of hours to burn during that time. And Destiny did a great job of burning hours. I think a lot of people, and rightfully so, give Destiny a lot of gruff for a lack of a story, really. But for me, I don't really need a great story in my shooters sometimes. Like sometimes I just want to shoot stuff and just move along. And I think Destiny did a really good job of that. Like Destiny 2 had a much better story to me, but was much less captivating a game than Destiny. I guess because I'd experienced Destiny before. I don't know. But not saying that Destiny 1 didn't need a great story. I think it would have benefited from that. And I think they did a good job of rectifying that in later updates. But overall, the big appeal to that game was just the looter shooter that everybody loves. And again, one of those games that I had a dedicated group. We played a lot of it. If you don't like Destiny, you're probably not going to like it being on this list, but I think you can probably level that it is one of the more impactful games. A lot of people still to this day love Destiny. I got the chance to do a raid because of streaming. I was randomly streaming Destiny 1, just multiplayer, which I also loved because I love Halo multiplayer. It's very similar. And somebody came in and was like, hey, have you ever done a raid? And I said, no. And they're like, do you want to? And I was like, sure. And like the next day we just randomly raided on stream. I wish I still had the VODs, but I did my part. I finally got to do a raid, which was 6 people. And we never had enough. Now I'm sure we could probably build a group with some online friends, but yeah, shout out to Destiny. Just a great game that I don't want to get lost in the annals of this list. So here you go. Number 55, Control. Wee-oo, wee-oo, wee-oo. Oh, you know what that sound means? It's time for Dorm's most hard to place game on this list, possibly. I say that about a lot of games, but this one was really hard. I don't know what happened there. So Control is a fascinating game for me. Not only because it is a great game, but also because I still don't know how I feel about it. This game came out last year, 2019. So I went through waves of emotion with Control. When I first played it, I was like, okay, this is my game of the year up until this point, or it was almost my game of the year. It was like second game of the year because another game will be later. At this point in time, this is one of the best games of 2019 for sure. I was constantly amazed with how good it looked. I had the ability to play it on PS4 Pro. I was lucky enough to see some of the really cool lighting effects and things like that of the game. The gameplay I felt was really meaty and hard, but in a good way, and challenging, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought the story was interesting. I thought the environment was insanely cool, and that was almost enough to carry the story by itself. And there were moments in this game that are maybe some of the coolest moments I've ever had in gaming. So with all that said, you would think, oh God, this is like a top 30, top 40 game for me. But looking back on it, I had a second wave. We are now in wave 3, by the way, so we'll get there. But I had a second wave of opinion. After I completed the game, I platinumed it. I got all the trophies in the game, and maybe more than any other game, I felt very complete in my pursuit of that game. It was one of those sort of like dust your hands, all right, it's over with kind of games. And then this sort of second wave of aftermath opinion hit, where I was calling it the most forgettable 9 or 9.5 out of 10 game ever. That was too harsh. But I think the sentiment that I was carrying there was this. It was such a compact experience. I played it so intensely for about 2 weeks, a week and a half, 2 weeks, that it just came and went. And I think the way I played that game, because I was streaming it, but not too much differently than I would play a game before I was streaming, where I was just like, all right, this is the game I'm playing. I'm going to play through it and maybe get all the trophies after if I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, so I got all the trophies. It was one of those games of like, there was something left on the bone that I didn't quite get out of it. I think that might have been the sentiment there. However, I have now hit wave 3, which is I appreciate this game a lot more than I did in wave 2. And that was kind of a weird, convoluted way to describe it. In this game, I should probably describe what the game is. Jesus, sorry. I keep talking about like my personal relationships with games. In this game, you play as Jesse Faden, who has sort of been sent to this Federal Bureau of Control office called the Oldest House. And you're there to pursue, I won't spoil the story. So you're there to pursue something. And you show up there and things are a little bit different than you might expect. And the early aftermath of the game is really exciting because this environment of the Oldest House is weird and shapeshifty and ever moving. And you go down a hallway, you come back and the hallway's changed. The environment is incredible and weird, and it's so hard to figure out. Not from a gameplay standpoint, sorry, just from a story standpoint. The maps are great. It flows really well. I just meant as you're playing through it, you're like, what is this place? This Federal Bureau of Control is sort of like supernatural FBI, I suppose, or like pseudoscience FBI. It's basically all of these wild objects are stored at this place that have different abilities attached to them. And as you play through the game, you gain abilities. And the shooter gameplay is incredible. It almost feels like a superhero game with a gun in a way, as opposed to a shooter with abilities. It's very flowy. If you've seen some of the gameplay, you know what I'm talking about. There's certain abilities where you can like throw things. I don't think that's a spoiler because it's literally in the trailers, but there's certain abilities where you can throw things across the room and you can dash and move. It's similar to a lot of modern games now in the shooter genre, very similar to Doom in this aspect too, where they're almost combat puzzles where it's like, okay, we have these 5 enemies. I have a bunch of different ways I could take them out. What's going to be the smartest way for me to do it? What order should I take them out in? Oh, I don't like fighting those guys. I'm going to kill them first. Then I'll deal with everybody else. It's kind of got that approach to it. The gameplay feels fantastic. There's also something, I'm just going to refer to it in name as the Ashtray Maze, because if you've played it, you know what it is. If you haven't, that doesn't mean anything to you. The Ashtray Maze is maybe the coolest scene in a game, and Remedy is the developer behind this game, by the way, that I've seen in some time. It is one of those things where you're like, I literally in my playthrough of the game just kept going, this is awesome. This is so cool. Like I just kept raving about it because it was incredible. That like 5-10 minutes is the best thing the game has to offer. And maybe one of the best things in gaming from the past few years. I love that scene so much. The characters are interesting. Some of the negatives that put it lower than my top 40, as I talked about earlier, was sort of that experience I had with it. And I think that experience of hitting that second wave is brought on a little bit by the ending. I found the ending to be pretty lackluster. I just think this game had a lot of story potential. I was expecting something more revelatory than what we got. The game just kind of says like, yep, you did it. And I don't think that's much of a spoiler either, but there are really cool reveals along the way. I just feel like they should have maybe saved one for the end or added a second twist or something. I don't know, but the ending itself is kind of like, okay. And I wish that were a little bit better, but that doesn't take away from all the positives of the game. And I'm sort of upset with my former self that I kind of, again, I called it a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10, which is a great like Hallmark score, but I also said it was the most forgettable one of those games, and that's not doing this game a service. So here is my official putting that to bed. This game is great. It also goes on sale a lot regularly. Please pick it up. It's totally worth $30 or however much it's on sale for right now. You should play it. It's great. You'll love it. I promise. Number 54, Rayman Legends. I'm laughing thinking about Rayman Legends because after all of the equivocating that happened during Control, we are now in one of the silly game blocks again. So Rayman Legends is like most Rayman games. It is a platformer. It's like any other side-scrolling platformer. You are kind of collecting stuff throughout the game and trying to just get to the end of every level. You know how platformers work, I'm sure, if you're watching this list. What Rayman Legends does really well outside of normal platforming stuff is, first of all, it allows for local multiplayer. Similar to this, the local multiplayer sort of works similarly to the new Super Mario Brothers games, where everybody's on screen at once, and if somebody dies, you can kind of like pop a bubble to save them and bring them back to the stage. More on that later. But it also has really, really cool settings. There's a whole world that's based around food and also shrinking into Tiny Rayman and going through these little like wormhole kind of places and then sizing back up to Big Rayman, and there's some puzzles involving that. But the overall feel of the game is very fast and fluid. It's very movement heavy. It's not super puzzle platformy, although I just talked about some puzzles. That's more for like getting extra collectibles and things like that. The overall feel of the game is very fast, and I think that is shown off very well in what they did for the online sort of leaderboards challenges, which I'm still playing to this day because one trophy is absolute garbage. I love that game, but the trophy is insane. But anyway, I'll leave my grievances with the trophy aside because I know most people don't care about it. It just takes a lot of playing the leaderboard things. Like I played Rayman Legends in 2014. It's 2020. I still haven't gotten the leaderboard thing, and I've gone through waves of being pretty serious about it. It's just one of those games, or one of those trophies rather. But there's still people to this day trying to get through these little arcadey challenges, which are make it as long as you can without getting hit, or complete this stage as fast as you can, or collect as many lums, which are just like the coins of the universe, as quickly as you can, or collect as many lums as you can in the level. Things like that with different stages. And there's still a community for that, and it's still really fun. Part of my love of Rayman Legends, I love platformers anyway, but part of my love for it came from college. But I mean, I was in college 4 years of this decade, so of course that's going to infect my decade. Or influence. I said infect. That's going to influence my decade. When I was in college, we had a group of 3 buds. It was me, my best friend, and another friend of ours who didn't really play a lot of games, but was down to just like hang out. And so we all 3, one of the games that he really enjoyed playing was Rayman Legends. Like I said, he wasn't a gamer, but there were times where I don't think he would call himself a gamer. He enjoyed playing games like, most people do, but he wasn't like gonna go out and buy a PS4. But there were times where both me and my best friend, or my best friend and I, would die, and he would like complete the level, complete the section, and bring us back, hit a checkpoint, whatever. And every time he did it, he would just be like, "Oh, boys, picking up the pieces." And so picking up the pieces just became a thing. He played as like the funniest looking character that you can play as, this big round guy. It was just, I don't know. It was hysterical. It's that game. Again, I said at the beginning of this video series that my personal memories with games were going to affect it. Lo and behold, we've got another one of those. But Rayman Legends is fantastic. Play it with a group of buds. You'll love it. It's such a good time. Number 53, Firewatch. Hey, we got another narrative game. I went more ham on that than I expected. Yep, it's Firewatch, another narrative game. This time you play as a park ranger, I believe, or someone who works at a national park. Their job is to basically watch for fires. A Firewatch. It's a Firewatch. And sorry. Throughout your job, you are talking on this walkie-talkie with sort of someone you just know as your superior. And you're having conversations about, oh, I saw this fire over here. And when you see a fire, you can go out and explore the world. That sort of, like a lot of these quote unquote walking simulators, lets you unravel stories. I think the first half of Firewatch is some of the best narrative written in games. I love the first half of Firewatch so much. The first story with like the beach teens is incredible, and I just love the way that story unfolds and the way you're introduced to all these characters, both throughout the environment and the woman you're talking to on the walkie-talkie and the character you're playing as. The game opens with this really cool, this is your story so far sort of thing, and you kind of get to decide what your reactions to different text-based things would be. It's almost like a prologue to a book in that regard. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the art direction of this. This game was art directed by Ollie Moss, who I have a Breath of the Wild print of here that Ollie did. There's a Mario print over there, Super Mario Odyssey print over there, and there is a PUBG print behind me that you can't see. Ollie Moss is one of the reasons I got into graphic design in the first place. His posters are legendary. A lot of people have seen his Star Wars posters, his Harry Potter posters. I adore Ollie Moss, and a lot of people know Firewatch for that image of the tower amongst the orange forest. It's also one of the best PlayStation themes out there. And Ford ripped it off and was like sued by it. It's a whole thing. But the art direction of this game is freaking phenomenal. The game is beautiful. It's such a cool polygon art style, but not in a way that's distancing itself. It's subtle polygon stuff, which is really cool. And all of the books you can find in these sort of caches have covers that look like Ollie Moss posters, because Ollie Moss did all the covers of the books. And it's just, it's so good. It's so beautiful. My only qualm with the game comes with the second half of the story. I think it got a little too, it almost lost its own scope, if that makes sense. And that's something in design where we talk about that with clients a lot, which is, you have this idea that you formulate in a bunch of early meetings. And then, especially with websites, this happens a lot with websites, people just want everything all the time, and there's no reason for it. So people may want 50 additional pages about the background of their company or something, when two people may click on that. And it's like, well, do we really need that? That's maybe a bad example, but there are all these additional pages that people want because they just realize they're possible. I feel like that's what kind of happened with the Firewatch story. It just kind of lost its own scope a little bit for me. And that's the only sour note about that game. I think the second half pales in comparison to the first half. But the first half is absolutely phenomenal and a masterpiece in narrative. So for that, it ends up on this spot on the list. Number 52, Rogue Legacy. This list is just full of randomly generated games, and guess what? We've got another one of the best, I think. Rogue Legacy is a randomly generated Metroidvania style game. So basically you go into this castle, there are these different sections of the game, and the idea is to complete the castle eventually. Now, the cool loop with Rogue Legacy is you do kind of make progress. Once you beat a boss, I believe it is beaten. You can go back and rebeat it basically, but you can have concrete progress in the castle. You can also unlock like gear upgrades and things like that through the different stores before the castle. You can also revive yourself. There are a lot of different ways that you can actually make progress in the game. But one of the coolest parts about Rogue Legacy, each character you play as is an heir in this family lineage. And with that, it's so funny. Each character has different positive and negative traits. You could be super strong, but have vision that's only in black and white. Or you could be really fast, but enemies are knocked back a ridiculous amount, which can be helpful, but also can be harmful. Your swing button now, like there are so many, I don't remember all the family traits, but there are so many positive and negative traits that are hilarious in that game. And so learning what those are, learning what you like, learning just the way the map is laid out and how to pursue it. That game is freaking so good. There's not a lot I can say about it outside of how good the gameplay is, because the gameplay is so addictive. And yet again, I keep saying it, but it's another one of those one more round games. Maybe the best example of a one more round game, just because you keep a little bit of your progress, and that is enough to say like, all right, this next time we're going to get it. Especially with gathering money and buying better armor and buying better weapons and buying different things to help you in your journey. It's just so good. Just play Rogue Legacy. It's a cheaper game now. It's a little bit older. I promise the gameplay will still hold up. It's just so freaking good. Number 51, Severed. Up until this point, maybe the least heard of game on this list, depending on what circles you follow and sort of how into games media you were around the time this game came out. You may not have heard of Severed. It's a game made by Drinkbox Studios, which made the Guacamelee games. They've also made a few other really good games, but Severed is a game they made, I believe, exclusively at the time for Vita, which of course is another reason a lot of people haven't heard of it. A lot of people didn't have a PlayStation Vita. I did. I was a diehard Vita guy. Still have my Vita. It is a dungeon crawler, similar in sort of the look of the game to like a Doom, where you're just going through rooms and you kind of have these squared off rooms. But when you encounter enemies, you go into this screen and it's all touchscreen based. I know that may sound weird. You then attack enemies based on slashing, almost like Fruit Ninja, I suppose, just in the way you slash things. It doesn't play like Fruit Ninja. Different enemies have different openings and different things you have to do to get them open. And on the Vita, it just plays so well. The story's cool. The visuals are so pretty, very purple and green and blue and pink. It's very saturated and very cool colors based. It's a beautiful game, and I still love the art from this game so much. But the gameplay is so fascinating and obviously made for Vita and not a lot of devices. I believe it might be on Switch now, and I believe it was on mobile as well. I could be wrong there. It is on Switch now, yes. I just looked it up. But it is also on iOS. Severed is just so good. I've never played another game like it before or since. And for that, there deserves some heralding. But also, like I said, the story is really cool. Like with other Drinkbox games, there doesn't need to be a really story because the gameplay's so good. But there is a story anyway, so like I'm not going to complain about it. And the story is fascinating. But just the gameplay is so interesting. It's kind of hard to describe how good the gameplay feels just because I have no comparison point. It's just so captivating. It does touchscreen stuff right and actually makes there be a reason a device has a touchscreen at all. A lot of times touchscreens just aren't that big a deal. This time it is, and I just adore this game so much. Play Severed if you can, because it's the most unique experience you might play in a while. And that's going to do it. This was a long one. Expect them to probably be as long as this or get progressively longer, because we're getting to more and more really good games that I can gush about. I don't know. We'll see. I'll try to keep it shorter. I get on rants sometimes, and it's really fun to just talk about games because games are awesome. But thank you so much for watching. If you're still here at the end of this, like I said, this has been a long one. Also, thank you so much to the patrons. I actually pointed in the right direction. Look at me go. Over at patreon.com/stormstreams for making this video possible. Thank you so much to everybody who supports over there. Again, patreon.com/stormstream if you're interested. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for watching. As always, take care of the dorm while I'm gone, and I'll see you in the next video.